All right. What I'm going to try and do is four things. First of all, I want to try and get people to understand we're in the worst trouble this country has ever been in, by far. We've never had the kinds of problems that we've had now. Never has the environment been so totally devastated. Never has the economy been so completely incapable of providing gratifying lives to anybody. Never have we been in a situation of unending war. And never have we gone so far backwards on what we once called civil rights. And adding to that, while we never had a democracy, we've never had a total onslaught on the little democracy that we've had. And the thing that is most, you have to know the most about without going through all of those, is that we're doing nothing. We're paralyzed and able to change that. And so we need to now, first of all, get a sense of where we are. And that's what I want to talk about next. And that basically, over the years, we have become now to a choice between fascism and democracy. That's our choice. In 1979, Bertram Gross wrote a book called Friendly Fascism. That's 79. And what he really was talking about then was how corporations were exercising more and more control over our lives. Fascism, as he defined it, as Mussolini defined it, was corporate control. That was 79. Bert died in 1997, and his book never sold much then. It's selling much more now than it ever did, except there's one difference. It's no longer friendly. Friendly fascism was a way in which you can exercise corporate control without the people know they're being controlled. It was done through illusion, telling you that these were the best things in the world for you. Corporations created jobs. Corporations saved the environment. Corporations were good. It was also confusion, trying to make sure that you didn't have real understanding of what was going on. Division, which was always very important to America, divide and conquer, was always a very important part of it. But now probably more than anything has been diversion. If you talk to kids now, they're so diverted by their iPods, their cell phones, their video games, television. Adults are diverted by sports. They're far more interested and get far more animated about what's happening in basketball or football or baseball. And entertainment, all of which now are corporate controlled. The problem is that if the issue is between corporations and democracy, people better have some sense of what a democracy is, and they don't. And that's what I'll be talking to you about. And I can elaborate any of the stuff that I've talked about up to now if you think that's necessary. I hope you don't. And then I want to end up by talking about how what you're doing, this initiative, Rising San Benito, fits into this or doesn't, depending on what you do. You can win and lose, and you can lose and win, depending upon your understanding of democracy. Now, what is a democracy? It's not what people say it is. It's not people voting. That has nothing to do with a democracy. It's not a constitution. That has nothing to do with democracy. It's not rule of law. What democracy is, 7 fundamental principles, and if you understand those principles, you can start beginning to bring democracy wherever you are. One of those principles is the nature of authority. At one time we could talk about, and they did, because let me just stop for a second and talk a little bit about what we do know about democracy. Robert Dahl, in his book, Democracy and Its Enemies, said democracy had 2 enemies, guardianship and anarchy. Interestingly enough, when Kurt Lewin did his experiments on democracy right after World War II, it was totalitarianism or authoritarianism, democracy, and laissez-faire. Well, we've reached a point where, given the nature of the world and the kinds of destruction, that there is no possibility of a non-lawful change. So the issue now is between democracy and fascism or some form of authoritarianism, which has always been. In fact, one of the problems we've got is we always try to think that the issue was capitalism versus socialism. It never was. It was always rule of the many versus rule of the few. But the rule of the many was never really understood. So the rule of the many starts with, first of all, with the understanding there can be no ignorant democracy. And so when somebody says we're going to Iraq and fight a war for democracy, you know that's just crap. It can't be done. If somebody like John Dewey says we fight World War I for democracy, you know he knows nothing about democracy. You can't bring democracy by war. It's not possible. You only can do the opposite. You can make the world a little less democratic. So people have to be informed. They have to understand the world that which they live in and their role to change it. Humans, by definition, have a DNA that requires them to change the world. That's why the humans, unlike any other species, change the world dramatically every generation. That's why no other species has cell phones. No other species has automobiles. No other species had anything. Only we do that. And so over the years, rather than changing the world to make it better, we've been changing the world systematically to make it worse, more unlivable. So you have to understand that world. And you have to also understand that democracy begins with vision. You have no idea. If you don't know where you're going, you can't have democracy. If you don't have some idea of the kind of world you want to live in, you can't have a democracy. So it starts with vision. It starts with each person having some idea of the world as good as it can be, and then talking about that and engaging in this continual discussion so that we share each other's vision, and out of that begin to develop some shared understanding. So it starts with that. It all starts with the understanding that if there's no such thing as an ignorant democracy, that all of us have to take on the role of educators. Each one has to now understand that our job is to talk about things we can do, things we can make the world better. And we have to understand another thing about democracy. It isn't going to happen worldwide, statewide, countywide. It's going to happen in very small groups, very small group of people acting on the world to change it and move it in the direction of a shared vision. Democracy is also exponential function. When I talk with teenagers and I say to them, if 10 people would change the world in 1 minute, and those 100 now would change 10 others in 10 minutes, how many minutes, if everybody did this 1 minute, would it take to change everybody in the world? And they'll go off and say 10 years, never, 10 minutes. Then they say, well, that's impossible. And I said, of course it's impossible. You don't have to change everybody, and you have more than 10 minutes. But that's how democracy will grow, with small understanding. So each of us have that take on the understanding that since there's no ignorant democracy, each of us have to become an advocate for it.